Lawyers of Reddit, what's the worst way you've seen a person screw over someone else in court, whether it be criminal, civil, or divorce proceedings? Represented a guy that stole 3 trucks from his work. Only 2 were recovered before trial. He showed up to a motion hearing in the 3rd one. I took my ex to court because she had used my social security number to sign up for cable. I found out about it when she stopped paying for the service. She screwed herself over by just being herself. We show up to court. I turn in the contract from the cable company, showing my social security number and her own name signed on the contract. She didn't even try to forge my signature. She signed her own name in and tried to deny that she had any part of it. The judge tore her apart, and it was nice. A witness for the plaintiff in a civil suit, who was a co-worker of the plaintiff, testified very strongly against the company and in favor of the plaintiff. I questioned her about bias toward the plaintiff, if they knew each other well, were friends, etc. She said, no, just friendly co-workers, work friends at best. I pinned her to it. When I got a chance to cross-examine the plaintiff, she had no choice but to burn her witness's credibility, because not only were they very close friends, but they had become sisters-in-law just a few years before. No, they did not have the same last name or anything, but I had done my homework. I still don't get why people want to fight small bias by destroying their credibility, but it happens more than you'd think. I'm being sparse on details here due to confidentiality, but I had a client who was accused of a very nasty sexual offense. He had an alibi. He was at work, where he was the boss. He had an employee who could absolutely vouch for his being there. I talked to the employee confirmed this. It gets closer to the trial, and around the time when I need to send in an alibi notice, which is advance notice to the Crown, so that they can investigate the alibi and determine whether or not it's true. But I'm being careful, so I call the employee up again. Turns out my client fired him in the interim, and so the employee quite candidly tells me, oh, yeah, he was definitely at work. But that's not what I'll say in court. Fuck that guy, he is going down. I did not call him as a witness or file the alibi notice. Still won the trial, but if I hadn't thought to call the guy, or if he'd been less candid, my client would have been fucked hard. Sex offender registry, jail time, the works. Completely innocent. He's the boss and stupid enough to fire his alibi witness before the trial? D. From talking to the employee, I'm guessing he saw he deserved the firing. That said, people accused of crimes may not be the brightest, but even the smart ones often make some dumb mistakes. I mean, a lot of people with child porn get caught because they take their computer in to get fixed and don't think, hey, I'm handing off evidence of very serious crimes to a random stranger. Not a lawyer, but a friend kept meticulous records of how much time his estranged wife spent with their daughter. He used pink highlighter for mom and blue highlighter for himself. Mom sailed into arbitration demanding full custody and handsome child support in the house. Dad pulled out 3 years' worth of year-long calendars. Mom had spent less than a full month with the child in 3 years. Mom was not happy with the outcome. Not someone else, but my client screwed himself. I'm doing landlord-tenant stuff and my client was facing eviction over non-payment, but the client was withholding rent payments because of habitability issues in the apartment. No heat, high lead levels, vermin. This is gonna be an easy win for me. Told my client continually to make sure they don't spend the money, keep it but don't spend it. Because if you show the judge you still have the money, it looks real good for you in terms of making the judge believe that you're withholding for good reasons. We get up in front of the judge. Landlord doesn't have an attorney, so I'm dancing inside. There's no way I can lose. I make my arguments and the landlord makes his. Judge asks my client if they still have the money. Client goes, nah, I blew that shit at the casino last week. Too many criminal client situations to count of them screwing themselves over. One of the very few family law cases I handled as a young atty sticks out to me though. Young woman and young man have child. Young woman seeks divorce from young man because he enjoys the thug life. He had recently been arrested and charged for possession /int to distribute meth. felony, and in possession of a firearm, and lawful carry. Young man doesn't like her leaving him. He hires a local big name top divorceatty, granted, very rural area. Gets temp divorce order rented saying she cannot have overnight guests of the opposite sex. Common in rural conservative areas, think it's mostly a thing of the past in more urban places. Young woman starts seeing someone new. Young man is very upset about this. Has his fancy lawyer ask for a hearing accusing her of violating court order and seeking full custody, on top of ATI fees. Young woman, on advice from a mutual friend, hires me for this hearing. I sit down with opposing counsel, and she basically tries to strong-arm me her experience, and lays out egregious terms. Mother must not only give up primary custody, but must have visitation with a supervisor, and pay child support and ATI fees. She knows I'm a new baby ATI in town, fairly certain I had been licensed for less than a year. I balk and she says she'll see us in court. I go into hearing with a copy of his probation arrangement on his POS/intent to sell and unlawful carry. He hasn't told his ATI about this, and she is unaware. She calls him up, establishes how my client had her new BF over on X, Y, Z nights. Judge is very conservative, not pleased. Then, opposing counsel passes the witness. I ask him if he has a job. No. What do you do for money? Things here and there. Oh. Ms. Opposing counsel is awfully expensive. Do you sell meth? What? Have you ever sold drugs to make ends meet? No. Introduce a copy of his guilty plea and straight probation sentencing. Judge is now staring daggers at him. I lean over to my client sitting next to me and whisper, if you took a drug test today, be honest, would you be completely clean? Yes. I ask the young man, when was the last time you did meth? ATI objects, but judge overrules. I know this judge will drug test people on the spot as he is also the misdemeanor drug court judge. It's been years. I'm clean. So, if you were tested, you'd be clean? Yes. Opposing counsel asks the same of my client. We agree. Judge has them both tested. He tests positive for meth. My client is clean. Judge denies his motion and asks me to send in new temp orders where young man is required to maintain employment and start paying child support, and places him on supervised visits. Icing on the cake, opposing counsel actually calls me and leaves me a voicemail congratulating me on, and I quote, handing her ass to her for the first time in a long time. That last part is nice. Your opponent didn't take it personally and even showed respect. Nice. I probably have been very lucky in my career that very few opposing counsel, be they for the state or in minor civil matters, I try to avoid civil these days though, take things personally with me. I'm a very jovial guy and try to get to know them over the course of cases. There is one prosecutor I currently have cases with where we may argue cases/issues, but between being before the bench, we share our respective latest cool D&D moments. We both DM games. Just recently he and I had one of the last cases on the docket and we were discussing said sessions, and judge had to interrupt us and said, if I could get you nerds to stop for a second and do this motion, that'd be nice. I'd like to go to lunch. Laughs were had. Lawyers that take things personally or get personal with opposing counsel are shitty lawyers and don't belong in the profession, but that's just my opinion, man. More of a case of screwing himself over, but here goes. This was a case another prosecutor in my office had a few years back. 30-year-old defendant was charged with sexual assault of a child after he got his girlfriend's 14-year-old sister pregnant. She actually kept the baby, so the police just waited and got a paternity test. No surprise, defendant was the father. Defendant wanted probation. Prosecutor refused to offer it. He decided to plead guilty and have a jury trial on punishment. Here in Texas, you can choose to have the jury set punishment. Evidence mostly proceeded as expected. The victim testified to having consensual, aside from not being old enough to consent, sex with the defendant, getting pregnant, etc. Paternity test introduced. Defendant took the stand. His version of events was that he snuck into victim's room at night, covered her mouth, and held her down while he forcibly had sex with her against her will. It seemed like his own lawyer had no idea that's the story he settled on. The jury deliberated about 15 minutes before returning a verdict of 17 years. The maximum possible as charge was 20. When interviewed by the attorneys afterwards, one of them said they decided on 17 years, so the defendant would never forget the age of consent in Texas again. Well, not my story, but a prior boss's story. They had a drunk driver kills a car worth of people case at the time, when they were a general practitioner. My boss was representing the family that got hit, one where the 2 kids and the wife had died, but the father had not, and wanted the college guy's drunk driving skin to be mounted on a wall. This was back before Facebook was commonly used in court proceedings, and before tons of people realized that shit is too great for any attorney worth their weight in salt to pass up. So, the kid, drunk driving college kid, had managed to get the judge's sympathy during the first part of the hearing by saying he was sorry, haunted, never going to drink again, this was going to ruin his life, etc. The judge seemed to really be eating it up. Then comes my boss and immediately burns this kid's remorse to the ground by showing numerous Facebook statuses and photos of them binge drinking, partying, and even joking about driving drunk from the date of the accident up until a night ago. The kid looked like he was being forced to swallow hot coals and the judge was absolutely livid. Needless to say, the kid had to do way more than just apologize and be remorseful after that. Someone I knew had a pro dia case where she had to defend a person who had been charged with a criminal offense, don't know what, confidential and whatnot. Even though the police and DA could pretty much pinpoint the crime to her client, there was no evidence to tie him to the crime, circumstantial at best. She had instructed him to shut up and let her do the talking during the trial, as from experience the client sometimes does not know how to answer a question properly. She pleads and can show that the court has nothing on her client. She feels that for once, a pro dia case is going her way. After her plea, the judge thanks her for her plea and turns to her client. He asks if the client had something to add to the plea. Client looks at her, back at the judge, tears well up in his eyes, and he blurts out, "I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again." She threw her notes and everything else she had in her hands at the client, now convict, apparently. She basically got screwed by her own client, who screwed himself even worse. Edit. Pro dia is the old term in our jurisdiction, same connotation as pro bono. Not my case, but my dad's. He was the equivalent of a public defender decades ago. There was this guy that would get caught for being drunk in public lewdness, etc. every weekend. He seemed to draw the same judges, and was pretty well known to everyone in the courthouse as an absolute lost cause. One of the regular judges had him appear in his court again. The judge is ready to give him a prison sentence because he was driving a car this time, but the guy starts crying that he finally got a job out of town and was trying to turn his life around. Judge tells him, as long as he never makes a mistake in my town again, he would just drop the charges. Well, sure as hell the guy shows up the following Monday. Same judge. Driving drunk again. My dad now has his case. The judge tells him he gave him his final chance, to which the guy sobs and replies, "I was leaving town, Your Honor, but my friends decided to throw me a going away party." The judge was not amused. My dad had to do everything he could to not laugh.